Welcome to Restaurant Deal Making Exposed, the only show that equips you with everything you need to know about restaurant transactions. In this show, we tell you all about how to make the sale or purchase of your restaurant not just possible, but successful. Now here are your hosts, ex-restaurateurs and seasoned brokers, Patrick Toda and Andy Mirabel.
Welcome to Restaurant Deal Making Exposed. I'm Patrick Toda and here with my co-host Andy Mirabel. Today we're diving into the world of food journalism. What it's really like to cover restaurants in a city where hospitality is fast-paced, competitive, and constantly evolving. Our guest today has spent years reporting on the people, places, and stories behind the food scene, helping readers discover what's new, what matters, and what's worth their time. We're joined by Lauren Saria, food editor at the San Francisco Standard. Lauren brings over a decade of experience in food journalism. She previously served as a site leader at Eater SF and as the food editor at the Arizona Republic and Phoenix New Times. A graduate of ASU's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, Lauren co-chairs the James Beard Foundation Restaurant and Chef Award Committee. She's also a graduate of the Poynter Leadership Academy for Diversity in Media and has been recognized by the Association of Food Journalists for the best food feature. I'll just say I've really come to prefer reading the SF Standard over other outlets here in San Francisco. It's more positive, less clickbaity, and generally avoids the doom and gloom. It feels more grounded. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me and for the kind words.
All those kind words bring a lot of questions to me already because we've just met Lauren. And again, thanks for joining us. A co-chair of the James Beard Foundation. Yeah. How did you get that role?
That's a long story. I have been sitting on the committee since 2019. So I actually started, there are like regions for the awards. Each region has representatives on a committee. I started in 2019 when I was in Phoenix, and then there was like a pause of the awards due to COVID and some other stuff. And by the time they re-picked them up in 2021, I was living here in San Francisco. And so because I had already been involved, I got to continue on with the committee, which is like an incredible honor. And now I've like done it so much, they're like, you can never leave because
that's amazing. You should be so proud of that. And the fact that you're so coveted within that network is just amazing. I should have called you like 6 months ago to help give our Sacramento, I'm from Sacramento, and my buddy Chef Billy was the runner-up. So I was like, you are not.
And I love crew.
All right. We just went to his new restaurant last week and we hope to have him on the podcast in the very, very near future.
Yes.
But nonetheless, we'll have to catch up about that outside of this. How about that?
Wow. It really is a small world, I guess.
Yeah.
So if you're from Sacramento and you studied journalism in Arizona and stayed in Phoenix for a while, when did you come back to the Bay Area?
I moved out here June 2021. I had not lived in San Francisco, but obviously growing up in Sacramento, like we used to come into the city to eat when I was a kid and do our shopping as a family and all that stuff. So I was like familiar with the city, but had not like lived here until 4 years ago now.
Got it. Okay. You came just post-COVID then. And
yes.
Wow. That's quite a time to dive 100% into living there. Don't you think, Patrick? Because it just was night and day. I was a restaurant owner in SF and had one in Sac, but also, just the 2010 to 2019, there was problems and challenges, but it was a great time to have a restaurant there. And then lo and behold, the pandemic.
I think there's a silver lining to that timing because like had I showed up in 2018, I think it would have been kind of hard to like wrap your arms around this food scene that's like moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour and so competitive, like you mentioned. But in 2021, like everyone was kind of in this restarting mode. And so I kind of to meet all these people as they were sort of ramping back up their restaurants post-pandemic. And it definitely, I think, helped.
Patrick and I often talk to our, on certain subject matters and with guests, but like the new normal now. And I mean, you're like the perfect person to talk to given that times have changed and this needs to be our new normal. And some people are really clinging on to that. When is things going to get back to normal? And it's a tough nut to swallow. A tough pill to swallow.
We are normalized. Come on.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. And like the scary thing, I think that like I'm talking to a lot of restaurant owners about is like, with all the uncertainty now with tariffs and like the economy, like they're like, we just reached what felt like an equilibrium. And now it's like, okay.
It's one more thing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we just did our last podcast on the tariffs. So anyways, we relate and understand. I want to know what kind of led you into food journalism. What inspired you to be in this niche of journalism?
Yeah.
Where'd the spark come from?
Yeah. I mean, I always really loved writing and reading. And so, when I was trying to decide what I wanted to be as an adult, like I really wanted to do a job that would let me like write. And also I kind of knew I wasn't a person who wanted to like sit at a desk and like type, like just, do that. So journalism felt like maybe it was a fit because you get to run around and talk to people and write. And honestly, I started in sports. I did a little bit of sports journalism early in my career, and I covered baseball, I covered spring training in Arizona, and I like realized that like the really good sports journalists I was meeting were people who would like travel with a team all season, and they would be on the field, at the stadium as much as the team and the players. And then they would go home and like read baseball stories from other teams that they weren't covering. And like, I realized you really needed to be able to immerse yourself so fully in whatever you were going to cover if you wanted to be the best at it. And for me, I was like, oh, no, that's actually not baseball. I don't love it quite that much. But I realized like I did really love eating, and I always loved cooking. And my family's like, they are the type of family that will drive for a restaurant that we've heard good things about. And so I got an internship writing about food, and like I just like never really looked back. Like it's a thing I can think about every waking minute. Basically, I can think about it and not feel like, exhausted. I feel rejuvenated thinking about food.
Well, then you and Tanya are two peas in a pod. I take a back seat to the food world with her. So anyways, that's a really good backstory and a really good, to let us know and our listeners know how you got to where you are now, which is a really wonderful place and level within this food journalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I would go back into school, I always wanted to be Al Michaels or John Madden. So I would have gone down that road, and I just didn't think it was possible. It just seemed like something unobtainable. So that's my slight regret, I guess, in life. So tell me, how do you balance honesty with fairness when you're doing reviews, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah. So right now at the Standard, like our coverage, we do sort of columns where we go to a restaurant, we write about the experience. They're not quite reviews. Different jobs in my career, I've written reviews and I've edited critics who that's their whole job is to do reviews. My philosophy is, that as a journalist, but especially as a critic, the people that you're serving are the readers. And while so much of your job is interacting with restaurant owners, and certainly you are usually there's a lot of responsibility to the restaurant community. At the end of the day, the heart of being a good journalist is being there and being honest and doing a service for your readers. And so when that comes to reviews, you need to think about whether or not a review, positive or negative, is actually helpful. So I think like on one hand, if I go to a restaurant that everyone knows is good, it has a bunch of positive reviews already, nobody thinks it's bad, and I say, oh my gosh, did you know this restaurant's good? Like, that's probably not helpful. Like, everyone already knew that. The same thing for restaurants bad. Like, if I don't need to go to Applebee's and tell you, hey, you probably don't need to go eat here unless you really, love, I don't know, frozen margaritas and chicken wings. Like, you want to give information that people don't already know.
I'm okay with that.
As soon as I said that, I was like, to be fair, I will mess around with Applebee's when they...
Before Tanya and I go into Nordstrom Rack, we have to pop in there for a drink. So, just so you know, that's our secret. And I just said it on a public radio or public podcast.
Wow.
I love it. So yeah, it's the idea of like, a review is only useful if it's something that people didn't already know. So if it's a restaurant that is generally regarded as good and you go in and you find it's not meeting expectations, that's useful. And hopefully, of course, you're being honest.
If the quote unquote dining community already knows a concept or restaurant is good or quote unquote not good, what other angles do you take to illustrate your story? If it's not just saying this is good for these reasons, and this is bad for these reasons, do you have to look for a different angle in it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think like a lot of being not even just a critic, but like a food journalist is helping people understand like how a restaurant fits into the larger sort of picture of the food scene. You're a restaurant owner. Like most people are opening restaurants because they have some sort of story behind it. And sometimes it's a very full story. Like, I just really like pizza and my neighborhood should have a pizza place and here's a simple pizzeria. But when you're talking about like a chef-driven, independently owned restaurant, the story is oftentimes a lot more interesting than that. And people aren't always even good at recognizing or realizing or understanding their own story. So I think a lot of what food journalism is like finding that and pulling it out and then telling it to the world. And like in some cases, if you've got a publicist, that's very easy. But sometimes you're talking to a person who's like, I don't know, I just wanted to open a restaurant. But when you get into conversation with them, you realize there's a lot more behind it. So
well said.
That's interesting.
Well said.
Yeah. I saw you did a story on Frika on 16th Street.
Yeah.
And I actually had just gone there because I went to watch a movie across the street and I had like a whole little 16th Street. We went to the new wine bar that's right up the street that someone I had been working with, but he ended up going with a different location. And so I got this whole little 16th Street thing and I went to Frika for the first time. And then I saw you had reviewed it as well. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great example of like a place that my colleague actually wrote that story, but I've walked by it like so many times and I didn't, I've never spoken to that owner and it was a really lovely story about, and a little bit of irony with the also owning Pork Store Cafe. Anyway, you should read it. If you
Exactly.
That's great. Then how do you really come to a decision on what restaurants or food stories to cover? I mean, is it your gut? Is that what you're going on? Is there already a buzz about it that you're trying to build on? What gets you?
Yeah, it's a mix. I mean, so like sort of like practically and strategically speaking, like running a food section, you do feel some pressure to like, if everyone is talking about whatever restaurant, we should probably figure out a way to also join that conversation. So some of the decisions are that this is an important buzzy thing and let's find our own sort of way to be a part of that conversation. And then I think the more fun part is I think like most food journalists will understand the reference of like the Jonathan Golding of your city, where you feel like you get to like uncover these gems and like tell the world about them for the first time. I think that is sort of like probably the part that most people enjoy more, like digging up things that people didn't already know about. But you eat a lot and you go to a lot of not good things people aren't talking about to find the good things people aren't.
Very well said. Very well said. How many times do you have to slow pitch an idea or a story to your publisher in order to get the green light and get it to publish?
Yeah. I mean, I think it varies based on public. Like when I was at Eater, because that team was very small and I kind of got to call most of the shots, I had a lot of leeway to kind of do whatever I wanted. I mean, obviously I had managers and editors and things, but yeah, there was a lot of opportunity there to like take risks and sort of write about places that hadn't been written about and maybe were outside of the box of what most people would, think about as like places to eat. But currently, the standards food team is like myself and one other person. And, every time we write a story, we send a photographer. There's a lot of resources basically that go into writing about a restaurant. So you do sort of have to make the argument that like, this is a good investment of our resources and that it serves our audience in some way, which is a long answer to, it depends.
Yeah. No, that's clear. You're totally right. It has to make sense for the business, the budgets, and everything else. But first and foremost, must be exciting, I'm gathering, right?
Exactly.
So from your experience, what types of stories or restaurant trends tend to gain the most amount of traction or buzz?
Because we see the restaurant openings and closures. I mean, it's just like ad nauseum, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the outside the box that really get the buzz?
It's so funny. You would think that in like 10 years, I would have like... I wish I knew what was going to take off. Sometimes it really surprises you. Like a couple examples, like one of the early stories I did at the Standard was this piece about like Indian dining in San Francisco had sort of reached this new elegant era. We had a bunch of sort of high-end Indian restaurants opening around the city, and I wrote about that. And it went gangbusters. Like everyone wanted to read about this. And I was like, oh, who knew that was going to be so popular? And then sometimes you write, like we wrote about a $22 giant croissant. That one's less surprising. Things that like are popular on TikTok are kind of a shoo-in. So it's always nice when you get an Indian fine dining hit because you're like, oh, okay, the world isn't terrible. Like people also care about interesting, more substantial stuff than giant.
I think Patrick and I we've started to learn about that on a very micro level with our podcast. We're like, why did that episode get way more attention and likes and listens than the other one.
The algorithms are a big mystery. Nobody really knows.
Yeah, you just like really never. I mean, the usual, like the old journalism adage, like if it bleeds, it leads. If there's people arguing and lawsuits, it's probably good.
Yeah.
That's like not the fun stuff. So
when we talk specifically about restaurants, or let's say a new restaurant or bar concept, what are the things that stand out to you personally or makes it stand out from the pack? I know my mom be like, I'm looking for a clean bathroom, but you know what I mean? Like you get what I'm saying? Like there's certain things that stand out. What stands out to you, Lauren?
Yeah. At a new restaurant, I think like a little bit like creativity with the menu, I think is the first thing. I'm not probably going to get really excited about like another Cal Italian restaurant, like amazing. not that they're not all great, but I think whenever there's a type of food or a menu that looks like something I haven't seen before, that's always really interesting. I think just because we're humans, when there's somebody involved who's got some sort of name recognition, that's always very exciting. And when I'm in the restaurant, having worked in restaurants and opened restaurants, been on an opening team, when I walk into a space, the energy and the sort of like demeanor of the staff and the service, I think that's such a good indicator of like how things are actually going. Because I don't know, sometimes you walk into a new restaurant and the energy's like anxious, like
I'm holding my breath on that one. I'm trying not to do a leading question here, but how, Lauren, how do you think welcomeness and service has changed in restaurants from 5 years ago to now?
Yeah. I think so much has changed about the restaurant industry generally, but especially like on the front of house service side, a lot of people I think hit their limit of like what they were willing to put up with in this industry and within customer service, and like either left because they were like, screw this, like I could go do a different job and not have to deal with you being mean to me, or they're still in it, but they have just a little bit of a lower tolerance. Like I think the era of the diner's always right is like done, and that's maybe not a bad thing.
Maybe not to a full extent, right? It's not, and I think a lot of people did have the opportunity to make a life change in 5 years ago, 4 years ago. So
a few places out there right now that I won't name any names, but you ask for like a change and they're just like, absolutely not. And it's like, okay, like I understand that you have to kind of hold your ground a little bit, like with everybody wanting to change every last little bit, but there should be a little bit more flexibility, and service should always be first and foremost. And I think that's getting lost a little bit.
Yeah.
That was my favorite part of having restaurants, is the interaction and creating the experience, not overwhelming, not taking the lead with your personality. I mean, but really being a strong part of it and of the total dining experience. And that was my favorite part of having restaurants. I miss it wholeheartedly.
Yeah. I mean, I also think about restaurants, like different restaurants fitting different kinds of experiences. Like if I'm going to a restaurant and I really just want to like sit down and like eat my food and not be bothered, like sometimes really effusive service, I'm like, can you not, like, I don't need you to explain margarita pizza to me, like I can. And like sometimes,
or hear your life story over my margarita pizza.
I don't actually care where the pizza came from that much. And so for me, it's like, I obviously dine out a lot, so I have a sense oftentimes of what the service will be like. And sometimes I want to take my book and sit at the bar and like, I want you to refill my water, but I don't want you to like chat me up, and like, that's okay. But other times, like if I'm spending a lot of money on a meal and the menu's very complicated and it's a bunch of sort of esoteric things and ingredients I don't know, like, I expect you to explain it to me.
Yeah, I'm all ears on that sort of stuff. When I get a welcoming server or bartender these days, or manager, owner, whatever it may be, my heart just warms. So, maybe there's something to it that, we're not expecting that everywhere. And when we actually get it, it really counts.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so nice.
Well, I think I kind of canceled one of my next questions, but I am very curious about your thoughts on food journalism, i.e. a journalist such as you or similar, versus an influencer. Can you touch on that?
Influencers can be really great for restaurants sometimes. Like, sometimes that exposure is great for them. So like, I guess caveat to anything I'm going to say is that those people can serve a function, and that's great. But journalism and journalists is very different. I personally spent years of my life and a lot of money going to school to learn like the fundamentals of reporting and interviewing and the ethics of reporting and doing journalism. And so those are all the underlying things that I bring to even just writing about a restaurant opening. And in many situations, that's extraneous knowledge I have that doesn't need to be applied to a very simple story about a restaurant opening. But
it's there. It's there in what you're writing in your background. That's how you've been taught and learned.
Yeah.
Yes. Baseline as well. Like we know what to expect from you so that we can measure other reviews by that versus this other way.
Exactly. And a lot of that, the stuff, even the situations where it would come into play are things that you would never know as a reader. So like, for example, journalists like are thinking about things like conflicts of interest and probably have a very high bar for, what they will say they'll write about. And if they are going to write about something, for example, if I'm going to write about a business and it's a place that, my dad is an investor in, like that would just never happen. And a more concrete example is that when I was in Phoenix, I worked in-house for a restaurant group as like a director of marketing. And so I obviously was very close for several years with that chef. And when I went back into journalism, part of negotiating for me to take that job was I will never write about those restaurants. But beyond that, I will also never edit any stories about that restaurant. Anything about the chef that I worked about goes completely around me so that my biases toward that person, good and bad, having, worked very closely with them, are not going to play a part in our coverage. And so those are the types of standards that journalists are holding themselves and their coverage to, that an influencer, like maybe they would want to, but they just might not like even know to think through things in that sort of critical way.
You're really well spoken on this subject. I think that's actually very vital. Having Patrick and I had restaurants in the birth of the Yelp era, and the pressure that came with each one of these reviews from just, common people that are dining with you. And now it's just coming from everywhere. Yeah. And we've seen in the media, we've seen, online,
large restaurant groups who are, exposed to these kinds of, and we don't want to talk about that, but
there's people that crack under this kind of pressure and this kind of constant bombardment. Rightfully so, to an extent, I would think, because there's a lot of pressure if you're always seen being reviewed.
I mean, and like a journalist too, like, especially if you're working at like a traditional newspaper, like, when I worked at a traditional daily newspaper, we were not allowed to accept anything free. Like if a restaurant even had a complimentary dessert, I would have to add that to my bill so that I was not taking anything complimentary. Different outlets have like different standards on that. But I think the thing is that even if the standards are looser, there's a standard and it's discussed. And so it's like they're operating under usually a very sort of explicit set of rules that influencers may or may not be. And there are some influencers who are very transparent, but there are a lot of influencers who are not. And I think that's where, a diner can sort of end up with bad or not high quality recommendations.
Yeah, that's very good.
Have you in the past had any experience with writing a story or exposing a story about a restaurant that is for sale, whether it's public knowledge or not public knowledge?
Yeah.
We spoke about this actually, I think.
A little bit about this is like my personal ethos. So like, I'll say that. But so, yeah, I think with restaurant openings and sales and closures, especially, you do oftentimes get the information before the business wants to make it public. And my personal way of handling that is to go to the sort of stakeholders and say like, hey, I have this information. I probably have enough information to run a story without you telling me anything. I did my job. I've got this stuff. But I understand it's a better story if you're a part of it. So I'll say, hey, like, what does timing look like on your end? If you treat me as a professional and say, hey, I recognize that your job is to break news and tell people what's happening in their community. And I recognize that your job is to protect your staff and your suppliers and like make sure that the deal is inked before it makes it onto the internet. Like, let's just have that conversation like two professionals and work out something that is tolerable for both of us. It might be later than I want to run the story and might be earlier than you want to, but like, let's work together. I think part of what makes great journalists great is having a really strong network of sources that trust them. And I think for me, I found that sort of way of treating like the people I'm covering like normal people is like the most successful way in the long term.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Patrick, can we pause right there and give her like literally a round of applause?
Yeah. She's playing mediator like we do with our clients, buyer and seller. Like she's doing that with both sides,
I also, like a lot of the times in those difficult conversations, like tell restaurant owners, look, I worked for a restaurant group where we closed restaurants and we opened restaurants, and I understand that's a delicate dance. But yeah, I just sort of tell them like, I get it. This is like, you're probably not emotionally doing great with having to close a business, and you have to tell a bunch of people they're out of jobs and close out accounts that have thousands of dollars in balances. I get it. And the last thing you want is a journalist being like, hi, I'm going to tell everyone before you're ready. So,
or an influencer. No, I really wholeheartedly appreciate your response, and I respect it. That was amazing that you have that perspective and that ethos. So thank you for that.
I think we need to get into your famous bonus question, Andy.
Oh, let's do it.
I know you love this one, so.
Yeah, we had to switch after our first 15 episodes because it was my question was falling flat. But this is just really straightforward. Can you share one of your most memorable recent dining experiences? And if you don't choose it to be recent, then by all means, why we are all ears given your background.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm going to share one that's like... It's memorable for just being so, it was one of those moments where even I was like, this is my job? What in the world is happening? I was invited to this event, so I did not pay for it. And frankly, I don't actually even know how it costs. So I will say that. I was invited to do a 3 Michelin star restaurant crawl.
What?
Oh, wait.
How many did you crawl to? Because that's...
We did 3, which is a lot.
In San Francisco?
San Francisco. So
wow.
Yeah.
So can we like get name? We could probably guess most of them, right? No, but go ahead.
Yeah. It was. So I actually didn't realize Capital One has a partnership with Michelin, and they put on this event for like Capital One cardholders, and I was just invited to go. But they had us start at Benu, and we, it was fantastic. Like Corey Lee came out and greeted everyone and gave a little talk about the restaurant. And then we had like 5 fantastic courses at Benu, which I still haven't done a full dinner at Benu, but that was my first experience at Benu. And it was like just beautiful. And the service was so great. And that dining room is like austere, but in the nicest way.
We'll have white carpeting. That threw me for a loop. I'm like, don't drop anything, Andy. Don't drop anything.
No, because I feel like I actually dropped something on the floor while I was there. And if it had been white carpet, I would have.
They were still fast to pick it up. You didn't even know. So
the service there.
Yes.
Yeah. So we did like 5 courses, and then they loaded us into like a party bus. They loaded us into a party bus, and they were like, would you like water or a tiny bottle of Moet? And I was like, obviously Moet.
Come on now.
And then they drove us over to Quince, where I had eaten before. And we had a couple courses there. And Michael came out and said hello. And then we jumped back on the bus and went to Atelier Cren. And we did like more courses there. And it was, I remember at 12:30 in the morning, I looked. Also, the whole time, everything's wine paired and you're drinking wine on this party bus. So by the time we were like finishing up at Atelier Cren, I was like, yeah, it was great. It was.
That sounds like a fantastic experience and priceless, to say the least, right?
Yeah, that sounds pretty
amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, thanks for sharing that. We both definitely want to thank you so much. This was so insightful to me, and you are so good at what you do. I have much more respect now being face to face on our little Zoom here to learn more about your background and what your ethos and habits are in writing and journalism. Congratulations to you. I know my partner Tanya would be mad at me if she didn't. She passed on her hellos and said how great you were too. So
yes, tell her I said hi, and that I am so excited to see this year's lineup for Outside Land.
My lips are sealed. Yeah. But anyways, thank you so very much. For our listeners, if you have any questions, you know where to email us or reach us, and look for the next episodes. We'll be releasing more soon.
Lauren, thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me.
If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to worry about missing an episode, you can follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you found today's episode interesting or useful, please share it with someone you think would benefit and consider leaving a rating and review.
Reviews help restaurant owners or buyers just like you discover this podcast and benefit from the important topics covered in the episodes. Your opinion matters to us as a listener, so feel free to leave topic suggestions and feedback for us, as we will use these to tailor the episodes to you and help you get the most out of listening.
Thank you all for listening to this week's episode of Restaurant Deal Making Exposed. If you're considering selling your business and would like a free consultation, reach out to Patrick and Andy at therestaurantsalesbroker.com or visit www.therestaurantsalesbroker.com to learn more.